I think Romeo Lavia is a player who needs game time away from pressure, not limited minutes in the spotlight. Just from watching Lavia, it's evident that his potential is high as he makes some of the hardest attributes in the game look easy, such as his ability to fluidly evade pressure with the drop of a shoulder before then driving past a pressing player, whilst also having the ability to create what I call a wow moment in the game, such as a disguised through ball releasing a player in behind the back line, or a long range pass to switch play with either foot. Last season in the Premier League, the 19-year-old Belgian completed his first season in senior football, and by looking at his FB Ref report from last season in the Premier League, it very much looks like a 19-year-old's. But before I go any further, with the new season approaching and new jerseys slowly being released, you can pick up some for yourself by checking out jerseyfifa.com. A link to the site will be left in my Instagram bio, which you can find in the description below. And alongside the new season's jerseys, they also have retro jerseys as well, and not just for the big English and Spanish sides like United, Real Madrid and Barcelona, but also shirts like the Italian jerseys from the 80s and 90s, and also some iconic names on the back as well. So you can check the link in my Instagram bio and use code ATLANTISFOOTBALL to get a discount as well. Whilst he does rank pretty highly for all of his short, medium and long pass completion metrics when compared against every other midfielder in the league, he doesn't yet have the know-how to control the game by getting on the ball and circulating the ball in order to dictate the tempo of games. If we look at Marco Verratti's FB Ref report for example, we can see that whilst his passing accuracy is world class, he also completes a huge volume of passes as well, which allows him to control games, something that can be particularly invaluable during big games and can allow your side to get through a tough 10 to 15 minutes, which can be the difference over a 90-minute game. As Lavia gets older, his passing volume should increase dramatically, which accompanied with his already excellent passing accuracy, means that I do think Lavia can develop into the same sort of regista as either Verratti or Pirlo. Another one of Lavia's attributes that I think could potentially become a key part of his game is his press resistance, specifically during the build-up phase, as that ability to receive the ball under pressure with your back to goal on the edge of your own box, particularly as a lone single pivot. It's definitely one of the most valuable assets in the modern game, and so it's rare to find defensive-minded midfielders who have this sort of comfortability when receiving the ball in these positions. Sergio Busquets, even until his last season at Barcelona, was probably still the best in the world at doing this, definitely alongside Rodri in 2023, but Busquets from around 2010 to even around 2018ish was the best single pivot of all time in my opinion. His reading of the game without the ball was elite even from a young age, but in possession his awareness and composure, specifically in pressurised situations, was laughably good at times, as you try to figure out how a player who you could regard as having quite a slow build has a technique and know-how to constantly be a step or two ahead of all the opposition players around him. And Lavia does have shades of Busquets' style in his play, which is extremely rare to find. Defensively, Lavia certainly has some work to do. I don't think he's great defending 1v1 when he has to cover a lot of space, often approaching the player far too flat-footed and getting bypassed in a way that the likes of Declan Rice and Casemiro rarely do, and this can be seen not just by him ranking fairly low for the amount of dribblers he has tackled, but also the percentage of dribblers he's tackled as well. In terms of reading of the game, he is good but not great just yet, which is expected given his age, but given that he ranked around the 75th percentile for the amount of interceptions he completed last season in the Premier League, I expect this to be a stronger part of his game than his ball winning through his tenacious tackling. If we look at other players who could potentially be options in this area for United, I would say that Sofyan Amrabat right now and for next season would be a better player for United than Lavia, having the game intelligence and decision making skills that the young Belgian hasn't yet developed. But in terms of which of the two would be the long-term successor for Casemiro, I would definitely edge Lavia because I think his ceiling is higher than Amrabat's. Whilst the Moroccan can be, and probably is already, a top-level, deeper-lying midfielder, I don't think that he'll reach that elite level, whereas I do believe Lavia has that potential. And so it comes down to how long will it take Lavia to develop into this sort of player, and to be honest, I don't see him getting to that level until he's mid-20s, maybe 23 or 24. And so potentially with Casemiro already being in his early 30s, Lavia could come in and spend the next 2 or 3 seasons shadowing Casemiro, which, thinking about it, may aid the defensive side of his game. Or United should look to move on from him and look to bring in a player who can come in at around or close to elite level, which I think players like Moises Caicedo and Frankie de Jong would. If Lavia was cheaper, maybe around £30 million, I would consider it, as I would with Amrabat, but for what Southampton are demanding, which is around £50 million reportedly, there's no way, particularly with United's budget this summer. Also, from Lavia's perspective, whilst going to Liverpool, Manchester United, Manchester City or Arsenal as essentially a backup to Fabinho, Casemiro, Rodri or Declan Rice, which I think it certainly would be for next season, whilst that big move may seem enticing for Lavia's career development, I think he needs to go somewhere away from the pressures of Manchester United. We've seen more established players like Jadon Sancho, Anthony, Van der Beek and Wan-Bissaka struggle to adapt to moving to United, and for me, I get the feeling that Lavia could end up in the same situation next season. I think ideally he stays with Southampton, absolutely bosses the Championship, and then next summer he'll potentially have a better chance of joining a top 6 Premier League side and actually having a likely chance of being a starter, and it'll probably cost a similar amount to what Southampton are demanding this summer. And I think that could be the issue for Lavia. A move to Benfica, Sevilla or Dortmund would be perfect for his development, enabling him to stay 2 or 3 seasons, and then at the age of 21-22, make the move to a top 6 Premier League side. However, Southampton aren't going to sell him for anything less than £40 million, and for all of those clubs it's slightly out of their budget. Maybe you pay that much for Maxime Kakare, Rayan Cherki, Jacob Ramsey or James Maddison as Tottenham did, but for me Lavia is a £30 million player at max, who's going to need 3 or 4 years of dedicated development before he can fully establish himself as an elite level midfielder. And for that sort of money, I think those clubs would want a more immediate impact, with the idea of them potentially moving him on after 3 or 4 years. For Manchester United specifically, I would rather Amrabat as a backup to Casemiro, with the idea of continuously looking for that player who will be the long-term successor to the Brazilian, which in a dream world would be Kobbie Mainoo in the next 3 or 4 years. To be honest, I'd prefer Ibrahim Sangare to Romeo Lavia, because he's going to cost around the same amount, if not maybe even like £10 million less. He's a more established player who's been very impressive for at least 3 or 4 seasons now, going back to his Toulouse Ligue 1 days. And all round is just a more developed version of Lavia, whilst also being an absolute monster defensively, which Lavia certainly isn't. Plus Sangare is 25 years old, meaning that he's about to enter his peak years, and when Casemiro moves out of that starting position around 2026 as an estimate, Sangare will still only be 28, but now with over a decade of experience under his belt. I also think Maxime Kakare at Lyon would be a better option for United than Lavia, and with Kakare he's also comfortable playing as either a 6 as a single pivot, or slightly higher as a number 8 pushing up between the lines, which is more where Mason Mount is going to operate. To me, Kakare has to be one of the, if not the most underrated player in Europe. He's got that natural blend between technique and style which enables him to navigate away from players with such elegance, all whilst retaining possession and progressing the play. Like Lavia, Kakare has the press resistance needed in the build-up phase, but as their FB ref reports show, Kakare is a significantly better progressor of the ball from the middle to the final third, via both his passing and ball carrying, and then in the final third also being a better creator of chances and a bigger goal threat. And Lavia isn't anywhere near Kakare at the moment in this department, with Kakare sitting in the top 15 to 25% for all these major metrics, and not just when his side have the ball either. As the defensive side of his FB ref report shows, he's an incredibly active defensive player, and whilst he does need to improve his decision making going into tackles, ranking fairly low for the percentage of dribblers he is tackling, he is still putting in a high amount of tackles and interceptions per 90, and so the raw ability is there, but at this point in his career Kakare doesn't yet have the decision making of an elite level deeper line single pivot, though this is something that he should naturally develop as he moves into his mid to late 20s, and I would argue that Maxime Kakare has world class potential, which may be even greater than Romeo Lavia. So I don't think United should sign Romeo Lavia, particularly for the fee being demanded, and I do think both Ibrahim Sangare and Maxime Kakare would be better options. Lavia, instead of going to a Man United, Arsenal or a City, in my opinion should be looking to go to maybe a Benfica, Dortmund or a Sevilla, though if he is priced out of those moves this summer, I would recommend he stays at Southampton, has an excellent season in the Championship, and then comes back to the Premier League if Southampton get promoted, or he should be able to make the move to the Premier League next summer with a greater level of experience and development under his belt.